an Islamic republic? And how did insurgent political theological ideology come to govern territory and head a state? Today, we're looking at Iran from the lens of political theory. But first, we need to understand the anatomy of political authority within Shiism. Who should be an authority? As we said, that with the Shia system, it's based off of lineage. If you look at how Abu Bakr was appointed, and then Umar, and then Uthman, and then Ali, each of them came to power in a different way. This is what distinguishes the Khilafah, which is the Sunni terminology, from the Imama, which is the Shia terminology. But today we're talking about the political crisis. The sense of political authority in 12er Shiism is very, very different from Sunni Islam. When we think about what force is like a safeguard or a mechanism from the community going astray, that force within Sunni Islam is the community itself, the Jama'ah. We believe in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and we also follow the Jama'ah, the concept of ijma', that there is consensus, and the Prophet ﷺ saying that his community or his ummah would not agree on a mistake. Today, we're looking at Iran from the lens of political theory, my first degree, to answer these questions and more. But first, we need to understand the anatomy of political authority within Shiism. Previously, we had talked about the epistemic and theological crisis of 12er Shiism, that if you're going to have particular claims of the Quran is not complete or the companions left Islam, then this tremendously undermines the strength of the deen and sets you up to have, let's just say, a not very well vetted corpus of so-called hadith that is collected much later. But today we're talking about the political crisis. So the sense of political authority in 12er Shiism is very, very different from Sunni Islam. When we think about what force is like a safeguard or a mechanism from the community going astray, that force within Sunni Islam is the community itself, the Jama'ah. That's why sometimes it's called Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, because these are distinguishing features of Sunni Islam. We believe in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and we also follow the Jama'ah, the great plurality or majority of the Muslim community, that the concept of ijma', that there is consensus, and the Prophet ﷺ saying that his community or his ummah would not agree on a mistake. So there's this almost populist, decentralized element, you could say, to Sunni Islam, where it's kind of bottom up, it's kind of organic, that the community has enough of a beating heart within it that it is collectively saved from error, if that makes sense, whereas individuals, of course, are not. Within 12er Shiism, it's actually completely the opposite, where the Imam, the appointed ruler, through descendant, through the house of the Prophet ﷺ and Ali, that is the hujjah, that is the infallibility, that is the mechanism by which the community does not go astray. So some of the commentators were correct when they said that the recent assassination of the Ayatollah Khamenei, or the supreme leader Ali Khamenei, it's like assassinating the Pope. It's not just like a temporal leader. Like, this is the person who is considered infallible. This is the person like through which religious doctrine is granted and crafted. And when it comes to authority in particular, there's also a different sensibility of who should be an authority. As we said, that with the Shia system, it's based off of lineage. And what's interesting historically is that this is perhaps something that comes about from being in a dialectic relationship with the Umayyads. Remember, the Umayyads put forth their legitimacy as we are, you know, we have a certain proximity, lineage proximity to the Prophet ﷺ, and we are now going to pass that down from one to the next. It was almost like the Shia came back with like, oh, you want to play the lineage game? Well, we've got lineage too, and our lineage is actually closer to the Prophet ﷺ through the descendants of Ali. Both of those are outside of what Sunni orthodoxy would say, which is that authority is more about merit. It's more about who's most qualified for it. That's why there's different ways that are acceptable of appointing a leader within Sunni Islam. If you look at how Abu Bakr was appointed, and then Umar, and then Uthman, and then Ali, each of them came to power in a different way. And they're not the same. They have different relationships and different kinship groups, and they're from different families. So it's not something that is necessarily inherited. It's really something that's about who's the best person for the job. And this is what distinguishes the Khilafah, which is the Sunni terminology, from the Imama, which is the Shia terminology. So of course, naturally, as a consequence, within 12er Shiism, anybody who's a ruler or tries to be a ruler outside of the line of Ali is called a ghasib. He's a usurper. He's not allowed to have that position. This is a divinely appointed thing. And I want you to keep that in your mind, because that actually creates a political crisis. Because then what do you do when you want to rule? How did Khomeini deal with that when he's trying to make an argument for an Islamic revolution and an Islamic republic? If you're not allowed to rule unless you are one of these 12 imams, essentially, there's an issue there that will be resolved in various ways, as we will see. It also leads to Rafd. So this is why in polemics, 12 Shia are called Rawafid, but plural, Rafidi singular, which is the rejectors. And what they're talking about specifically is being rejected is Abu Bakr and Umar. So because Abu Bakr and Umar led the community after the Prophet ﷺ, and they weren't one of the 12 Ahlul Bayt's imams, according to 12er Shi'ism, then by definition, they are usurpers. They should not have been in those roles. Of course, let's take a second to distinguish the Zaydis, the Fivers, that they actually accept, they don't have this same belief. They did not reject Abu Bakr and Umar in the same way that the 12ers did. So as foreshadowed, one of the problems of making your political succession based on lineage and inheritance is that what happens when there's no clear heir? Chaos ensues. And so we see that every single time there's ambiguity or confusion in the lineage and who should take over next, boom, that's where we get a schism within Shia Islam. So you've got Ali, you've got Hassan, you've got Hussein, then you've got Ali as-Sajjad, who's known as Zayn al-Abidin. Who's the rightful inheritor of the imama after Zayn al-Abidin? That's where we get the split between the Zaydis and on one side, and the 12ers and the 7ers on the other side. So the Zaydis, who are known as Fivers, they say that Zayd is the leader after that. The Ismailis and the 12ers, they say that, no, actually it's Muhammad al-Baqir. All right, then we get to Ja'far as-Sadiq. And who's supposed to take over after Ja'far as-Sadiq? He had a son, Ismail. Problem was, Ismail died before Ja'far as-Sadiq passed away. For some reason, that was not a disqualifier for the Ismailis, who are known as Ismailis because they attribute that line of imams ending with Ismail. And that's why also they're known as 7ers, because that stops the chain at 7. Now, it's very convenient for the Ismailis, and we're not here to talk about Ismailism, but Ismailism as the most esoteric of the Shia sects. It's kind of convenient that you have someone who's already dead that then becomes the imam, because now you can get into a lot of esoteric things. But for the 12ers go with Musa al-Kadhim and then his descendants after that until they hit 12. And of course, even the Ismailis and the 7ers and 12ers, they have their own sects and continue to disagree. Even when you introduce something that is like a safeguard against there being no actual successor. So this is where ghaiba comes in. This is the idea of occultation. So what do you do? How do you lead the community? Here's the open-ended question. How do you lead the community if you don't have an imam? This is where the idea of, well, there's an imam that's in hiding. And then when the imam that's in hiding, he can have a representative on earth who's living. And this is kind of the escape hatch through which Shia communities are able to get guidance. Of course, you can disagree about who is the rightful representative of the hidden imam, just like you can disagree about who is the next imam. So the Ismailis, then they split between Nizaris and Dawoodis, and then even more after that, precisely on these things. Who's the representative of the hidden imam who's going to come back later? So we see that this creates a theology that is built upon and structured around an expectation of return, which is why Shiism is very millenarian, to use the technical term. It's always looking towards the return at the end times. And there's almost a deferral of responsibility, you could say, or leadership, that we're not necessarily responsible for everything that's going on now, because in the end times, the imam is going to come out of hiding and he's going to set everything right. You could probably anticipate that this leads to a handicap in politics and in trying to stand up for what is right or oppose oppression, because if it's just pie in the sky, wait for the imam, what motivation do you have to stand up for justice here and now? What mandate do you have to lead or to take control? So Shiism, throughout its history, had this tension that it had to resolve, and it resolved it in a couple ways, but I think you can put them under one umbrella. The Shia revolutions, whether we're talking about Abbasid revolution, and a lot of people don't realize that the Abbasid revolution had a large contingent of it that was Shia. To the Fatimids, to the Iranian Revolution in 1979, it tapped into this expectation and longing for restoration that is associated with the hidden Imam. And just like we mentioned before in the previous episode about Al-Mukhtar and Al-Mukhtar al-Thaqafi's rebellion and how he used the figure of Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiyyah as the real authority, whereas Mukhtar was just the lieutenant, he's just the representative. That was the main mechanism by which Shia would launch political rebellions and uprisings and even justify political rule. That even if the Imam is in hiding, that there can be the representative of the hidden Imam or the representative of the Mahdi, what have you. The Fatimids employed this as well. And this is a very similar thing to what Ruhollah Khomeini also instituted. Now, he had a book. I couldn't find my copy, but I do have some copies here. Look at this thing. Islam and Revolution, Writings and Declarations of Khomeini, that his main intervention within the Shia Twelver tradition was this idea of wilayat al-faqih, right? It is the guardianship of the just jurist, or the rule of the jurist. So it's different, it's unprecedented in a way, because he's setting up a particular jurist, spoiler alert, it's going to be him, that is representing the hidden Imam and preparing the way for the return of the hidden Imam and the Mahdi. But in another way, even though it's a novel innovation, it's also something that is on this earlier pattern of someone setting themselves up as a representative for the hidden Imam. And this very thing is actually enshrined in the Iranian constitution. You can go